Welcome to the first episode of Cosmic Goblins, a fiction podcast specializing in cosmic horror, dark fantasy, sword and sorcery, sci-fi, and all things weird fiction. Since we're just getting started, I'll give you an overview of what this show is all about. This is a companion podcast to two sister publications, Cosmic Horror Monthly and Goblins Galaxies, and all audio productions featured on the show are adaptations of stories that have been printed in our magazines. So, if you enjoyed today's story, please check them out if you haven't already. There are many more dark, disturbing, and fantastical tales to enjoy. I'm your host, Alex Wolfgang. I'll also be your narrator for many, but not all of the stories we feature on the podcast. Today we're going to kick off our inaugural episode with a story from a writer we've admired for a long time, Premee Mohamed. We originally printed this story in issue 59 of Cosmic Horror Monthly in May 2025. Enjoy the show, and stick around after it's done, because we'll also be featuring a short interview with Premee herself. Now, settle in, and get ready to immerse yourself in a world of airship fortresses, imprisoned gods, and a hard man named Victor Stokes, a prison guard who's just been given the toughest assignment of his career. Cosmic Goblins presents Replacement Wanted by Premee Mohamed. Such were the rewards of vigilance unceasing. The old man lay dying, and the breath of his enemy roared around the room, tormenting him inescapably. Victor Stokes, who had been summoned as replacement, studied what remained in the bed, a thing like a decaying fish, man-sized, man-shaped, but with the translucent bones draped in a lacy red shawl of veins and muscles. As he watched, a scrap of skin the size of a playing card slipped off the man's shoulder and slid down to the soaked sheets. No part of the dying man moved in the tearing wind, nor did the books flap on their shelves, the flame flicker in its lantern. Stokes licked a finger dispassionately and held it up, perceiving the difference even though his hat was unaffected and the lank hair curling below it. So, not real. Meant only to frighten. Ending up like this, he said, is not worth £100 a year to me, sir. So I'll thank you to return me to solid ground, and you can find another to guard your prisoner. The prison administrator burbled something about the legacy, the bequeathment. Mr. Stokes, please! I cannot believe any sane man would haggle so over the fate of humanity. If a thing's worth doing, it should be paid as if it were, Stokes said, blandly. He turned to leave, pushing past the officious little man, then stopped, startled by the voice emerging from the room. Out of curiosity only, he returned and leaned over the bed. Holcomb, the dying man, stank of rot and burning, like a bonfire built of long-buried creatures. The wind ceased, as if it too was listening to what surely must be last words. "Why, you," the lipless mouth managed. Stokes smiled without mirth. 10 years I worked at Alverton Asylum, he said. Then switched over to Marnmouth Hospital, out in the country. I've been there breaking skulls and souls for 12 years, and they will take me back on once I am lowered again to the earth, should this man not agree to my terms. He glanced back at the official, who still would not enter the room. £500. Holcomb could not close his eyes. The milky, colorless irises jittered minutely, rested on Stokes' face. Pus flowed from the corners as freely as tears. Hard. Man. Stokes shrugged. He had seen every type of madman. Their madness meant nothing to him. Their screams and pleas were like the cries of gulls. No sound from an unthinking beast could break the heart. He did what the owners told him to do, or what the doctors told him to do. He feared no contagion of the mind, none at all, and he did not fear the inmate of this prison either. He said, thinking of all this, "Very well, I will remain, and I will stop up the crack through which your vermin sought to escape, when the contract has been amended to my satisfaction, and not before." Compared to the size of its scarlet-tinted gas bag, the Red Garden's gondola had appeared nearly invisible from the ground, a tick feeding on the belly of a bull. Stokes took the grand tour of the place with one of the guards, a compact young Irishman named Donovan, who seemed less weary and frightened than the others. The boy pointed out the rope and leather handles installed everywhere within the wooden interior, first off. "We don't get much wind up here, but when there's a bad storm off the sea, you can at least get to the head and back." The head consisted of a tiny room with 2 seats. Stokes peered through the polished wooden portholes to the sea far below, black and glittering in the winter sun. Prisons built on islands were supposed to be inescapable, but someone always found a way. He knew his history. Now, despite the inconvenience of being winched up in the wooden cage, he appreciated that the builders of the airship had gone one better. No one could get in, no one out. And the prisoner? "It's in what Mr. Halcombe called an inexplicable domain," the boy said, enunciating carefully. "I never seen it myself. I know only that the sail's made of iron. A box of iron all closed up, with no windows or doors." He chuckled, though his face remained grim. "Like the she back home. Funny to think it works on all unholy creatures, no matter what." "No windows, no doors," Stokes said. "No lock, no key." "No, sir." "I was told it attacked the old man." Stokes gestured vaguely at the crew quarters above them, where Holcomb lay dying. "He said there was an escape attempt. It didn't get out, but—" Donovan gnawed on his lip, uneasy. "Well, I suppose you'll see when you read the logbooks. But you know, it can raise voices, make sounds, create a wind, and sometimes coldness. I always thought it was a bit like a prisoner. I mean, a regular one. Sort of shouting in the hallway from his cell." "Till he suddenly realized he could reach out an arm," Stokes said, instead of a voice, and touched his jailer. "I'm of the opinion that some part of it did," Donovan said, "and I don't know whether it went back in. Nobody saw anything, including Mr. Halcombe. We asked and asked, while he still could speak." "And you and the other guards were unaffected, all of you?" "We're nothing, sir," Donovan said. "It's different from being the jailer." The jailer. More than a mere description of the position. Stokes began by taking the logbooks and anything else he could find from Holcomb's room. The entries were infuriatingly incomplete, a mass of gaps in time and attribution, as well as logic. That there had been, over the past 120 years, jailers who occasionally forgot days or names, he might forgive. But to leave gibberish behind for newcomers? He must run a tighter ship than that. Being the jailer of this thing, Donovan adamantly never used the term God, for it was blasphemous, was not a strictly hereditary position. But there had to be an apprenticeship, an overlap of a year or two for the old jailer to train the new. Stokes was unimpressed at the occasional comments from the owners. It was not precisely old age, but exhaustion, distraction, complacency that signaled the need for a replacement. What of it? Why, that was the case everywhere. It was certainly the case at both asylums where Stokes had worked. A moment's inattention might mean disaster. It was different from an ordinary jail, where the actions of the inmates might be predicted days, weeks in advance. Too bad that Holcomb had been so suddenly struck down. 2 weeks ago, he had been as hale and hearty as any middle-aged man, Donovan said. But one morning, he had woken up screaming and been unable to stop. Stokes set aside the useless logbooks. Holcomb had made no entry for the fateful day, nor the one before, and unfolded the old, crackling blueprints of the airship, the first set aloft in the known world. The Red Garden had been intended as a stopgap solution until something more permanent could be built. A tower, a fortress, something. The iron cell had come first, then everything around it, ensuring that the imprisoned god might never again touch either land or sea. And what would happen if it did? The records were vague, soaked in fear so deep he could nearly smell it through the paper. We captured the beast only through guile and base trickery, and it was weak. Never again can such an event occur through the strength of men, for men become weaker, and in its anger the beast groweth strong, in the iron, in the dark. For 2 weeks, Stokes worked on mastering his air legs and prowled the ship top to bottom, examining it with the kind of patient, minute obsession that resembled madness itself, though he would have laid flat any man who suggested such. The imprisoned god, written as Ichius or Echius in the earliest logbooks, remained as silent as it had from the day of his arrival, and the wind vanished from Holcomb's sick room, though the old man still did not die, merely suffered in silence. It was Stokes' private opinion that the man should be put out of his misery, quickly and humanely, like a rabid dog. But he had not been hired to do so. He was a jailer, and that was all. He often had Donovan carry a lantern while he inspected the hallway, ending in the featureless iron wall that was the only part visible of the god's cell. It was hideously cold in the hall, growing colder as one approached the metal, though no frost ever appeared on it. Stokes held his breath to avoid fogging his magnifying lens, and went down on hands and knees to examine the wood, the metal, the nails, the dust. It was a wet kind of cold, penetrating his thick uniform and woolen coat, sinking into his marrow. He ignored it. "Do your worst, monster," he muttered on occasion. "I shall not be rushed on your account, much as you may wish." Ichius said nothing. Stokes bared his teeth at the metal and rose, bidding Donovan back to the main hall. Once the plain wooden door was shut behind them, the air was warm and dry as ever. The facility had been tightly built, and if it had been a ship, Stokes would have deemed it right seaworthy, for he came from a shipbuilding people. Gaps were patched at once. The trapdoors and manways were all sealed fast. The small coal stove that ran the radiator system was carefully enclosed to prevent the egress of sparks and flinders. "How did it get out, Donovan?" Stokes mused, mostly to himself. The young guard was used to this by now and said nothing. "It needs no physical opening, not like a rat or a mouse, not even like a flea. The books say it is the size of a city, yet we have it here in a room smaller than the Jakes. How then, and why now, when it has never been able to leave?" Donovan remained silent. He had given Stokes all he knew, everything he could remember, and a few items he had forgotten, from the morning of Holcomb's affliction. Stokes had pressed him till Donovan felt near to passing out from tiredness. Eventually, he said, "Did you have to do this a lot, sir, in your previous positions?" Looking for escape routes. Like you said, stopping them up." Stokes' face grew dark. "A few times," he said quietly, "but under my watch, most of the madmen, no matter how mad, understood that it was better to remain. Always better to stay in than to face me if they tried to break out." "Yes, sir." Always better, he had told the younger man. But you do not need to know about that. There had been talk of arresting him and one of the other guards at Alverton, after not the first death, nor the second, but the dozenth. But Victor Stokes was a hard man. He was hard no matter what surface he was struck against. He was diamond. He was the one who would leave a mark. And so more than one judge had said, "Do not put him in the general population." The undertone had been, "We do not need to say why." He had forgiven them all, put all the faces aside, unnecessary things like the words to hymns, and yet that night he dreamt of them. Each one bright and distinct, more lifelike than they had been in life, when they had been gray and pinched from imprisonment and asylum food. Each one, the 12 that the authorities knew about, and the 5 they did not, the 5 without names, rising from their shallow graves. "You feel nothing?" they said, mouths unmoving. "Still? No? Nothing?" And he said, "No. You cannot force a man to feel. And they approached him, so alive, wet eyes shining, hands outstretched, clean hands, their clothing all white and glowing like the sun. In the darkness he awoke, not screaming but grunting through clenched teeth, the side of his head afire. The sun, his memory insisted. And he tore away from the thing holding him, hearing something rip, and then there was true screaming. He clamped it down, and so was silent when Donovan and one of the other guards, Gibbs, found him. Gibbs cried out and fainted. Donovan snatched at the man's lantern and held them both aloft as he took in what the lights revealed. Stokes on the floor, a swath of flesh missing, and the iron wall with the skin frozen white upon it, where he must have pressed his face as if to the warm and downy cheek of a lover. Behind the foot-thick metal, something chittered and scratched and sighed with satisfaction, or so it seemed, and then retreated. The sounds took a long time to fade. They watched Stokes with great trepidation, waiting for the wound to turn purulent, to take over his body as the touch of the gods had destroyed Holcomb. But nothing happened. It bled for a long time, then stopped and scabbed over, weeping only transparent pink lymph, like a burn. Stokes trained himself to speak and eat out of one side of his mouth. He stopped shaving the good side of his face, letting a dense reddish beard grow, quite different from the dark hair under his hat. His eyes burned hot and blue with hatred now, and the other guards remarked uneasily that they could be seen in the pitch dark, like ball lightning far out to sea. He pored over the logbooks again, sitting in the hallway a few feet from the iron surface of Echius's cell, shouting at any guard who dared approach, occasionally drawing his pistol. A jailer 45 years ago had taken his own life, writing for several days about the touch of the god in the mind, the entry through the mouth and the nose like smoke, the killing touch, for once it had gotten its tentacles hooked well into a man, then, no different from the Kraken, he was doomed, and his death and consumption would only give the monster strength. Had Stokes been touched so? He wondered if he would know. Perhaps his days were numbered, perhaps not. Holcomb had succumbed at once. What did it mean? Perhaps it was no defect in the cell at all, and the construction of the inexplicable domain, and the calculations of the first jailers. Perhaps the god did not need a hole in its cell. All it needed was a man with a hole in his mind, a weakness, something that could not be patch-welded or locked shut. "You should eat, sir." Stokes looked up balefully, but, seeing Donovan, left the pistol in its holster. It was a ridiculous weapon to have up here anyway. Even if they had been guarding a human prisoner, no one would dare use it for fear of puncturing the bag that held them aloft. "I ate," he said thickly, careful not to disturb the crusted wound. "Yesterday you did," Donovan said. "There's bread and soup in the canteen. And we had a shipment this morning. Apples and cheese, and a big bag of nuts, and bottled beer." Stokes remained unmoving on the floor, the big logbook open across his equally big hands, showing the jagged loops and ink splutters of the frightened, long-dead jailer. He seemed to be listening not to Donovan, but to some other voice inside his head, for it was cocked, like a hunting dog waiting for a command. Eventually, he said, "You've been here for 3 years, Donovan. Saw your contract." "Yes, sir." "The men who signed with you. I see none of those names in my roster. Did they quit? Were they dismissed?" Donovan blanched, until the only color remaining on his face were his black eyebrows and the flinching depths of his green eyes. "It'll be in Mr. Holcomb's logs, sir," he said, "but the shortest tale to tell is that it's a simple matter to access the trapdoors. That's all." Stokes was unsurprised. "And of them, only you remain. You alone." "I suppose it's just not in my nature, sir, to consider such a thing. Or, I mean to say, I've considered it rightly enough. It's hard not to, up here. But I couldn't do it. No matter how easy. Even if it were easier than this. Even if I thought it weren't a sin, or mightn't hurt, or anything like that. I couldn't. Stokes nodded. Then there is an iron wall in you too, he said, and I must build mine up. I see why there is normally a time to train with the outgoing jailer. Much to know, less written. You said soup? Pea soup with ham, sir. I will come and eat. 3 days later, he had to kill Gibbs. Holcomb had died in the night. Stokes felt it in his light, uneasy sleep, and woke at once, unsure why he had woken. It seemed as if a burst of laughter had come into his ear, although he was alone. The old man had fought and fought and fought his own death, until finally nothing remained in him to offer to the fight. His attacker was pleased as a small child might be pleased at killing the wasp that stung him, but it had not benefited from this particular death. All these things Stokes knew as he hurriedly dressed and summoned Donovan to the sick room with a light. Decomposition had been so rapid that there wasn't much to send down for burial. The sodden sheets, a couple of the long bones, 6 teeth. Stokes called for 2 more guards, crowding the small space, and wrestled everything into a canvas sack, tying it shut. The stench remained, sickening and unrelenting, as if the flesh had oozed into every crevice, between every board. Send for the cage, Stokes said, then turned to slap Gibbs, who was staring dreamily at the wooden wall, bearing nothing but an empty shelf. Attend me, Gibbs. I said go signal the cage. Yes, sir. In the lowering room, Gibbs put on the colored glass lights. The night watchman at the facility on the cliff below released the wooden cage onto its rope. 4 other guards, moving slowly in the confined space, worked the capstan to wind the conveyance upwards. Stokes, ignoring the noise, sat in the corner, attempting to write a covering letter to attempt to explain why the corpse was being returned in a sack. So his back was turned when the trapdoor was open, and Gibbs made his decision, or had it made for him. Stokes only heard the startled shouts of the others, the clatter of wood, then the high squeal of the rope as it whirled back out. He turned to see a scene of sudden bedlam, but bedlam was familiar to him, and perhaps Echius the god had not foreseen that. Gibbs was attacking one of the other guards. Donovan was pulling him away. Too late. Blood sprayed skywards from a neck not stabbed or sliced, but bitten through, and Gibbs turned on Donovan, his mouth all blood, teeth broken from biting on bone. Stokes took 4 large steps, avoiding the open trapdoor, the night sea below like a sheet of black glass. On the 4th step, he pulled Gibbs and Donovan apart, kicked aside the twitching corpse of the dead guard, and almost in the same motion, seized Gibbs' curly head and drove it into his knee. The man's frenetic motion slowed, but did not stop. Stokes registered this with the same lack of emotion which had marked his professional career. Ah yes, new information. And even as Donovan shouted, "Don't, sir!" he retrieved his pistol, pressed it to the man's forehead, and emptied the cylinder. 6 shots, 4 passing through to the wooden floor below. Stokes' ears were ringing. He could not hear what Donovan was saying, or the others, and he suspected they could not hear each other either. He put away the small gun, singeing his fingertips slightly on the hot metal, and returns to the paper and pen. He must write a new note to explain all of this. Or no, it could not be explained. He must simply describe it, and they would deal with him and the others as they might. Through the noise in his head, he seemed to hear the god laughing, a fat, smug laugh, a rich man's laugh as he ate from a groaning table and taunted the urchins and lepers below. There is a hole within you, a void, a world, a doorway. Set me free. You! Even in the dream, Stokes found he could laugh, and he knew it was a dream because his face was whole and tender, and he had no bandages for skin. You, a petty criminal, a pathetic frightener for a greater master. You are here because you got caught. I read it in the first books. Your master fled you, as he should. for no one employs an incompetent. I have seen it all before." "You have seen it. That is what will open the door to me. Haste, hasten the day. Set me free." Stokes laughed and ignored the instructions, and his laughter enraged the god, and he knew it, for he woke up with the angry wind in his own room, no more effectual at destroying him than a fart in a gale, and he told Echius this, and went about his day. He knew he had no hole within him. If he did, the god would have wormed its way in by now, as it had Holcomb, as it had Gibbs. After breakfast there came a signal light below, and Donovan and Stokes went to empty the smaller wooden cage that came up on the long rope, the week's supplies, and a note addressed to the jailer alone. The official ruling, as before, was that Stokes was not at fault, and could not be at fault. It was the fault of the inmate, merely compounding its charges, though not its sentence. Gibbs had been dead before his attack on the other guard, and he had, in a sense, been dead quite since the moment the god chose him and his weakness. The note did not say that the god must be stronger now with 2 deaths in its name. Stokes did not need it to. He instructed the men to read, to pray, to write home, to do whatever they must to avoid idleness and introspection. If they must have leisure time, he told them to do exercises or play chess. Whatever kept the devil from the doorway must now keep something infinitely older and more malevolent from it. "Why not just one jailer?" Stokes said. Donovan looked up, his face blurry and pink in the light of the sunset streaming through the small round window of the canteen. "They tried that," he said. "It was long before Mr. Holcomb's time. I mean, he just told us about it. It's to inspect and maintain the whole ship, you see, not just to guard the prisoner." "You don't even have any keys," Stokes said. "Nor do I. There are no locks. Yet the regulations state there should be 8 of us at all times, jailer and 7 guards at least. Are so many truly needed for the ship?" "Well," Donovan said, reluctantly, "leaving that aside, sir, when they tried it, the jailer went mad all alone and tried to release the prisoner." "Is it madness they fear? Is that all?" "I don't know," Donovan said, visibly yearning to escape the conversation. "I don't know what madness is, really. All I know is they tried it, and then they said they wouldn't do it again. They changed the laws." "I know the mad," Stokes said, then said no more, for Donovan was getting up, shaking so hard that the spoon jingled musically against the side of his metal mug, leaving Stokes alone at the table. He watched the boy go, and touched his pistol in its holster, heavy with 6 fresh bullets from the locked cabinet in Holcomb's office. He suspected the ship itself did not need him, or 7 others to run. It was not like the engine of a train. But minds needed other minds to run on their rails, and he decided to ask for replacements to be expedited, sooner rather than later, or the existing crew would not be able to bear the weight of their duty much longer. In the quiet, hearing only the sound of the sea far below, Stokes slowly finished his cottage pie and washed it down with the last inch of his lukewarm tea. Where were the survivors? Already he did not need to stretch out his mind to find them in the ship. He knew the rota by heart. 2 set to watch the signal lights below, and to watch each other. 2 on the deck, in the open air. 2 dead, God rest 'em, supposed to be watching the wooden doorway leading to the inmates' hall, and 1 who did not have a counterpart, whose duty was to watch the jailer. It was not quiet, it was silent, and the silence had a shape and an absence, like a shadow seen on a night lit only by stars. Stokes rose and took out his pistol, and felt absently at his other hip. Still no keys. There was no lock. The god did not have a body that needed to be imprisoned. What had been captured was something entirely else, something more essential than a form. And now, in silence, it was breaking free. Stokes ran. The wooden structure slung beneath the gas bag comprised 3 floors, and was, from port to stern, smaller than the chapel at Marnmouth. And still Stokes found himself lost as he ran, seeking a particular hallway, a particular door, and roaring quietly with frustration as east, west, north, south all fled from him, and he spiraled through wooden corridors he had never seen before, shivering in the light of his upraised lantern. Windows that did not exist showed him lands that could not exist, spires and towers aflame with the light of a dozen suns, caves far above the sea, filled with slow monsters, maws agape. Singing filled his ears, not from human throats. It was all frighteningly familiar. Had madmen not sworn to him that these places summoned them? That he must release them, so they could go to the land where they were understood? They too had sung these songs. He had struck them away from him with the flat of his hand. Stokes pushed the thought away, and kept running, focusing his entire mind, his entire spirit, the pain in his face, on the silence emanating from the iron cell, and perhaps the focus worked. For a moment later, he found it. The prisoner had Donovan, still alive for now, and it had taken control of the others somehow, caused them to tear one another apart, bare-handed. A nameless stew covered the floor, blood pooling where the bare wooden planks could absorb no more. Stokes crunched over sticky teeth, severed fingers, buttons, coins. "You have risen in power," he said as he walked, and he did not speak to Donovan, who hung bright-eyed, panting, one arm somehow inside the iron of the cell, the metal encircling his sleeve without seam or opening, as if it had grown from the cold gray surface. "But there is no key to release you." "There is a key. You have the key. Give it to me." "I have nothing." "Sir," panted Donovan, "who are you? Oh!" "Let me in, and you will see it. I will let you live. It will be a new world, mine, but you can live a little longer in it than the others." "And if I do not, what then? He remains here? That does you no good. I can see for myself that you still cannot get out, and he is your last potential sacrifice, and you cannot kill him yourself, can you? Only those who die swearing fealty give you what you need. You received nothing from Holcomb except a nasty revenge, satisfaction without a meal." "Not the last. I have not sacrificed the jailer." "Indeed not." "You will abandon him then? He is as good as dead, his body hanging here. You should give him a merciful death." "I suppose I should." Donovan wrenched futilely at the cell's grasp, but it was absolute and total. Stokes could have told him that. They were in a stalemate that could not be resolved by the prisoner, who lacked physicality, nor by Donovan, who had no weapons. Only Stokes still possessed his mind, and a body that could kill. And yet, there was the hole. He felt it now as he had felt it in his dreams. Echius, monstrosity as it was, had sent out enough feelers, or antenna, or whatever repulsive thing it used, to have tasted the essential voids in humanity. The faces hot as the sun, the faces that were the doorway. 12 known, 5 unknown, and he had not even known their names. All his life he had disposed of people as things, for inconveniencing him, for offending him, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, for simply failing to comply. And the gods had come in through this darkness. Kill Donovan and live. Very easy, after so many deaths. The boy's face was ashen in the trembling light of the lantern, and his eyes had lost all their color. They were the shade of the weak yellow flame. Donovan had not killed. Whatever opening lay within him was one the god could not exploit. All the doors of his fate had been closed. So it must be Stokes, the last chance. "Your hostage isn't needed," Stokes said flatly. He stooped, setting the lantern on the floor between a pair of outthrust legs. "Let him go. I will give you the key." "Sir, no!" Donovan cried. "No! You have to believe me. Believe us. It's worse than you think. It's not some wee demon or devil like in the stories. Donovan. Stokes placed his pistol in the boy's free hand. If you think I shouldn't, then shoot me. No. Do it. Stokes tapped his own forehead with a fingertip that felt like ice. Right here. You are the jailer. Let him go, Stokes repeated, and Donovan moaned as the iron flickered once and returned his arm to his side, hanging strangely but apparently intact. There. Now. Now. You. Now it is as it was before, Stokes said. You on that side, us on this. I'll be having that back, Donovan, he added, to ensure the boy knew whom he now addressed. It's over. One may make a deal with the devil knowing that the devil lies. Isn't that in your stories too? Yes, sir. Donovan, relieved, panting, reversed the pistol and handed Stokes the little gun. And then time stopped flowing. Stokes had distracted the god. The god, too, had distracted him. And now, with a cry of despair, he felt it reach into his skull, taking its time in the no time that passed, hard and white as a ray of sun shining through darkest night. Not a friendly light, nothing that could make something grow. There, through the void, through a lifetime of murder and careless violence, through sin and cruelty, through all the moments that had led here, now, a hard man fractured in a certain spot and ripe to shatter. There was the key, as real as one of metal, sailing out of his own darkness and into some place else. A place with a spire of stone, a place with a cave filled with impossible water, and the entire land was the lock into which it slid. Too late his hand came up, white in the dim and wavering flame. Too late the bullet flew. The impact erased his vision briefly, and for a few wild, triumphant seconds, all he could feel was victory. Victory. The thing did not get what it sought from me. But even as he thought that, he realized he still could think, and that meant he had failed. He did not see the key turn. He saw everything as if through a cracked mirror, one showing one angle, one another. In one, the airship roared and flamed as the iron cell exploded, and he was falling, the god falling too. Pieces of men and scarlet silk passing his face, the stink of blood. In the other, 1,000 voices screamed in rage and betrayal. This most hated of all our betrayers has returned to us. Without throats, without bodies, filling a dull and seething plain that never ended, and all these invisible things screaming in colors of light that could not exist. Stokes did not remember hitting the water. He did not remember the waves throwing him onto the rocky outcrops at the base of the cliff to whose summit the Red Garden had been tethered. He awoke in darkness moments later, woken by pain. His head roared and thudded as if on a blacksmith's anvil. Something approached him in the darkness, clumsy, coughing. Donovan. You shot yourself in the head? No. Don't touch. No. What? Some words making sense, some not. He let the younger man haul him upright, and they limped to a place of smaller stones, then sand, where it was easier to stand. You missed, Donovan said. More's the pity, Stokes said. His mouth felt full of stones and blood. If I had done it earlier. You don't know what would have happened. Not for certain. The airship was gone from the sky, or maybe some ghost of it was still up there. The stars were gone, and strange clouds were gathering, hotly lit from within with greens and violets, like a bruise. The distant chanting was growing nearer, though he could not see what made the noise. The sky was going mad. That, at least, he was familiar with. The way it twisted and writhed and cried out for things to make sense. It were better that we both died, Stokes said dully. Blood flowed down his face, chilling quickly in the sea air. For all the world's a prison now, and we're on the far side of the bars. Yes, Donovan said. Still, we must live a little longer, though. There's a path up the cliff. So? Come on. There's an infirmary at the facility, and maybe they'll... I don't know. Maybe someone will know what to do now. Too late for all that, Stokes wanted to say. Too late for the world. But step by painful step, he let the boy turn him, turned his back on the sky, and they hunted for the path in the new, illuminated darkness. This concludes today's story, but it doesn't quite complete today's episode, because we're here with Premee Mohamed, the author.
Hi, Alex. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, well, we're very excited to have you, especially because this is our very first episode, and you're our first guest, so it's exciting stuff.
That is exciting. I didn't know I was the first.
Yeah. We're just getting this podcast off the ground. We really, really enjoyed your story and knew we had to feature it on the show, so...
Oh, thanks so much.
Sure.
I thought off the ground and into the air like a zeppelin.
Absolutely. So I'm excited to get into talking about your story, but I wanted to talk a little bit about your background first. I understand that you are in the sciences. If I'm not mistaken, you're in, was it environmental science and molecular genetics?
Yeah, my first degree was genetics. I worked in a lab environment for a little while before realizing that it really takes kind of a certain type of personality to work forever in a lab, and I did not have it. And I wanted to do more field work and policy work, and I ended up sort of sliding into environmental science via soil microbiology. So most of my career actually ended up in environmental science.
Awesome. And so I'm curious, how does your career in science, do you feel like it feeds into your work as a writer and vice versa? Do they feel kind of compartmentalized, or do you think that they kind of work in tandem?
I think they work in tandem. I keep thinking about this with every new story, kind of.
Sure.
It's not so much, I think, that I am writing about my work or what my work used to be, because I actually left my last science position in 2023. It's not exactly like a one-to-one ratio, kind of.
Sure.
I think it's more looking at narrative from the perspective of using a lot of wide sources of information and research and influences and vibes and observations to kind of form a coherent story. And then the same way, the way we have to communicate science, especially in policy, which is where I spent the last 9 years, is you have to come up with a coherent narrative based on everything that you've worked on. Otherwise, the elected officials and the stakeholders and the public can't really understand what you're trying to communicate or what research has gone into it. So I think they're two sides of the same coin. It's trying to just find order in chaos, I think, because a lot of chaos goes into fiction, and science generates a lot of chaos on its own, and it has to be narrativized to make it comprehensible.
Gotcha. I love that. Yeah, it's almost like fiction, or the idea of like putting together a scientific narrative is like just your way of processing thoughts, feelings, observations, that kind of a thing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about your process, your writing process? Do you write every day? How do you balance it with your career?
Well, I am unemployed at the moment, or as my friends would have it, a full-time author. So the way that's being balanced now looks a little different. But basically, I try to work towards whatever's the closest deadline at the moment, and it sometimes feels like I'm running on a treadmill that's going too fast. That was still the case when I was working full-time, though. Mm-hmm. So what usually ended up happening was I would, work all day and then, go home. And if I could, try to get in an hour or two of writing or editing or researching or admin stuff. Eventually it kind of got to the point where my job was so draining and my commute was so tiring that I had to save all that stuff for the weekends. So in terms of like work-life balance, that's how it worked, is I would just clear my weekends, and then try to work like 8 to 10 hours a day, both days of the weekend. So that was really unsustainable,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I could see that leading to some burnout.
and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Was basically I was trying to work like 3.5 jobs and something had to give.
Gotcha. So, do you feel like now, without your day job sort of taking up so much of your time, has the process of writing become easier? Have you been kind of more prolific, or is it just sort of more of a mental balance than it is like a productivity kind of thing?
I think it's more of a mental balance. Yeah. It's it's certainly not less work. I keep being
Sure.
like, I am unemployed. Why am I working 13 hours a day?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
the reason is the work kind of expands to fill the available time. Again, I thought being unemployed was like having 0 jobs, not like 5 jobs. Uh, Turns out it's more like the latter. But yeah, in terms of my process, that the process hasn't really changed. And I think that's partly because it's sort of been refining itself. This is not going to make sense. It's sort of been refining itself for the last couple of years, basically since I stopped writing for fun and started writing on deadline. And my last sort of like maybe 25 stories or something have all been solicits. So I had to figure out how to go from, hey, I had a fun idea and I want to write the story, and then I will play submissions Tetris, to, hey, there's an editor who's working on an anthology or something like that, and they want something specific from me. And I didn't really know how to do the second thing. Like, I didn't know how to write on demand. But once I figured that out, that's kind of a lot of what I do now. So it feels more efficient. The trick is really still allowing myself to kind of have fun and challenge myself and play with language and ideas, um, while still feeling like I have an editor breathing down my neck.
Sure, sure. Well, that kind of brings me to Replacement Wanted, because Cosmic Horror Monthly did solicit that story from you, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, what can you tell me a little bit about, from the solicitation process, sort of how you kind of built it up from the beginning, or was there like kind of a seed that you started with?
Yeah, I actually I had that idea sort of tucked away in my back pocket, and I was like, "Oh man, I really want to write this one of these days." Just um this weird jail, but all I had was the setting and kind of the like the setup. So having the premise for a story isn't really the same as having a plot for the story.
Sure.
So I kind of I wrote back to Cosmic Horror and was like, "Hey, I have this idea. I'm gonna run with it." And they were like, "Sounds good." And I kind of went back to my idea. I had this very very clear vision. This horrible zeppelin against like a sunset blood red sky, and the single tether holding it to this sort of seaside cliff, and inside it something really really horrible in a jail cell. And I was like, okay, again, this is setting. How can I make this into a short story? And usually for me, I start at the end and I try to work my way back. So I thought, what do I want to happen to this inmate? Well, that's the end. So then at the start of the story, we want to start at whatever the opposite of that is, so that we can work our way through the story and eventually get there. So I thought, okay, to get there, something needs to change in the, how you say, carceral situation.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there's a change of policy. Maybe there's a change of location. Maybe they're moving the jail and something happens. Maybe there's, a change of supervision. Okay. Maybe there's someone who is very, very confident that there won't be any escapes or incidents. And that's what causes it to happen. Okay, that's more interesting. So that's, I start with how do we get there in a way that I think would be interesting to write. So it's very much all, it's all ego, it's all id, and then I kind of put a structure on it, and that's kind of where that got built up to, and that's how the story ended up.
Gotcha. Yeah, I love the character of, of Victor Stokes, and I think he did a great job. As a means of
Oh, thank you.
exploring the themes of everything that was going on there. The idea of a person having holes in them that this god character was sort of exploiting. So I was going to ask you if the idea started with the thematic idea of these people with holes in them, if it started with that and then you led to Victor, or if it was something that you kind of a theme that you sort of discovered through the character of Victor, like by creating him.
I think more the second. Yeah. It was Victor Stokes I came up with first. I thought, oh, here comes Billy Badass. He's a hard man. He says he's a hard man. He's a self-professed hard man, and he negotiates extra money to do the job. And I thought, I've known I have known so many people like this, and the hardness is really like brittleness. Like if you hit them, they don't flex, they break.
Hmm.
And I thought of all the hits that Victor has taken over the course of his life that he has not really accepted or processed or thought about the impacts of what he's done to people much. And and I thought, yeah, supposing you could exploit that. You see a lot of that in cosmic horror. It's this idea that uh, there are people whose minds are sort of more likely to go a certain way in the story, and there are people whose minds are likely to go another way in the story, and it doesn't really come down to intelligence or anything like that. It comes down to sort of past trauma and what kind of walls you have built up inside of you and what kind of vulnerabilities you have. You see that even in things like Blackwood and Lovecraft and Macken and stuff. There's certain people that just succumb to the others, and then there are others, usually writing the story, who didn't succumb.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's especially with the in the old pulps, you see the tough guy protagonist is a major trope that you always saw, and it's always fascinating to see what is behind the veneer of the tough guy. So yeah, it was really enjoyable to read about that. I want to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
the genre.
I like the idea of the veneer too. Sorry,
No, go ahead.
the veneer, because veneers crack. But
Hmm.
also, I like that you brought that up too, because in a lot of those older stories, there is the tough guy, and then there's the intellectual. And it's assumed that the tough guy is going to be kind of the hero of the story. And often it's something like, a librarian or an archivist or like a professor or something like that,
Hmm.
that ends up saving the day. And I always think that's so interesting. It's not about being tough in a lot of these stories.
Yeah, yeah, it's a nice reversal of kind of what you might expect from other genres. And this story in general, it does some genre bending. Of course, there's the very strong cosmic horror elements, but there's also some kind of dystopian sci-fi vibes, and even some kind of steampunk stuff with the airship. And then I also recently picked up your novella, I think it is, the Butcher of the Forest, which also kind of blends horror with the kind of fairy tale esque feelings. And I guess I'm wondering, whenever you start these stories, whether it's Replacement Wanted or any of your others, how much do you think about genre conventions, whether it is to follow in suit with them or subvert them, or is it just sort of a I'm gonna write what I think is interesting and see what happens?
More the second, I think, partly because um, Genre to me is really sort of more the last thing that happens to a story, like not even the last part of writing it, just like the last part at the point where it kind of meets the public, it kind of at that interface. I don't think it's useful for me to think about genre while I'm writing. And I think people often find that in my work, like if you look at something like, and what can we offer you tonight? There's clear kind of magical elements, even though it's a sci-fi dystopia. I like to mix sci-fi and fantasy. I like to put horror elements and tropes and beats in stuff. And for me, it's all kind of what would be fun and interesting to write in the story, or what serves the story's needs. And then at the very, very end, if somebody feels like slapping a genre label on it, more power to them.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. And I think by not thinking too much about it, that's sort of how you come up with new genre conventions or just something entirely new. And so I think that's a great approach. I want to talk a little bit about the ending as well, because it definitely has a satisfying ending to where if you were to never tell more of the story of Victor Stokes, then it would be satisfying. But there's also a lot of open-ended. You suggest things, as at the very end, him and Donovan are walking off to see sort of what's become of the world now that this god has been unleashed. Do you see yourself ever returning to this world, to these characters? And if so, what might form that would that take?
I hadn't really considered it. I do really like those kind of very open endings with a lot of like threads that could be pulled on later.
Mm.
Just in case I do ever feel like returning to the world, or returning to, a prequel, like how did this happen?
Hmm.
Like, why have we got a god in an airship? Like, this is ridiculous. This is terrible. And how did people figure it out? What was the incident there? Or what specifically happened to Holcomb, the previous jailer? And yeah, now what happens as the end of the world is occurring? Or maybe you set a story like 5 or 6 years later. What happened after the end of the world, and is there a chance to do something about it, or is it just sort of endless despair? Does the world look very different? Has it been repopulated? I don't know. I think every ending of every story spins off thousands of potential questions. And we always have to make that call when we're writing short fiction. It can't go on forever. No story goes on forever. We have
Mm.
to decide where we want it to end. But then there's all the unanswered questions. It's like the kid at bedtime in your head going, well, then what happens? Well, what happens after that? And then what happens? And then what happens? No, you have to pick a spot where you say the end, and then what happens after that is outside of the scope of the story, which means that it's literally infinite potential. Anything could happen. I would love to return to this world, um, but I haven't figured out how, because there are just too many interesting options.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, you can kind of go in both directions. There's the prequel and the sequel options for it. But I guess it's doubly true that you have to put a cap in it somewhere when it's a solicited story and there's word count requirements and all that. But yeah, I
I
love the
think I
idea
went
that
over the word count requirements, and I was very, very apologetic. I was like, please, you can tell me to cut like several hundred words. And they were like, no, no, it's fine. You're fine.
well, there's a bit of wiggle room sometimes. So what are you working on? Do you like? I want to give you a chance to sort of plug anything that might be coming out for you in the near future, or any projects that you're working on that you are particularly excited about. What do you have
Oh
going on?
boy. I have a horror story coming out in Roots of Our Fears, which is an anthology about sort of familial or cultural horror. So mine is about a mythological Caribbean figure. And it was another one of those cases, sort of like how I tried to write The Butcher of the Forest without ever using the word fairy. This one, I tried not to use the term associated with this mythological being either. So that was really fun. So that should be coming out fairly soon. I will have to look that up. I have a story coming out in a Stephen King themed anthology called The End of the World as We Know It, which I'm super excited about. That's coming out in, I think, August. We're doing a giant signing event in August anyway.
fun.
And yeah, my story, God, that was a real honor to be invited to that one. Its story's based on his novel, The Stand. And my story is set kind of after all the events, about 20 something years after, and it kind of explores a world that seems like it doesn't have a future, a world that's kind of winding down, and then a group of people who discover, oh, maybe it's not. And then the last thing that I'm medium certain that I have out this year is is the third book in my the annual Migration of Clouds trilogy. So speaking of, I guess, playing around with genre, this is, I guess, what we're calling climate fiction or ecofiction. I've been calling it sci-fi because it is set in the future and it has a made-up disease. But again, the genre labels that get applied to it are not up to me.
Sure,
but I'm
yeah.
very, very excited to get to the conclusion of that trilogy. So that'll be September 30th.
Awesome. And to any of the readers who might have really connected with Replacement Wanted and they want to read more of your work that's already out, what might you recommend for the next story that would appeal to the same kinds of fans?
I would probably recommend my short story collection, No One Will Come Back for Us. A lot of the stories in there are cosmic horror or cosmic horror adjacent. And if they would like something a little bit longer that's still sort of written in that particular vein, perhaps the novella These Lifeless Things from Solaris, which came out in 2021 and is a side quill to a cosmic horror story that I had published in 2017.
Awesome. Well, Premee, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciated talking with you, and we loved your story.
Thanks so much for the invite. This was
Yeah.
super fun.
Absolutely. This has been Cosmic Goblins. Thanks for listening to our first episode. If you enjoyed today's story, we encourage you to check out the many more dark and disturbing tales in Cosmic Horror Monthly and Goblins and Galaxies. This show is a production of Randolph Literary Press. Music by Tyler McLemore. Once again, I'm your host, Alex Wolfgang. We hope you return for episode 2.